Hi everyone, today I'm going to take you through another task for SBL and show you how I would approach it in the exam. So again, I'm not going to read the pre-scene to you. This is an old case study from the DKK in June 2026. And I'm not going to go over the exhibit to you and read it, but I'm going to pull out the key information and bits that actually matter and how you should do what I would do with them here. So again, the tasks and the exhibits in here are mine, so they are written by me on my own analysis of the DKK case study in June. Again, what we're going to look at is a task which is 18 marks, again 14 technical, and 4 for analysis time, and the command word which we're going to use is going to be evaluate. Okay, so what I want you to watch out for here is every time I put two facts in the same sentence, watch whether I say what is going to connect them, and that is where the second mark lives. All right. So what is analysis and what do we do with it under exam conditions? So analysis is, as it says here, reading what the figures mean, you link them together, reach the cause underneath, and build a picture of the whole. So it's asking you to pull out only the figures that bear on the question, say what each one does inside the business, and then put a size on the consequence and show how one figure actually affects the other. So let's start with analysis. Because it's actually where people think that they're already okay. Whilst the published definition will say that you investigate the information and process it, it's not to quote it, it's actually to process it. So here's what I actually do with that. So I pull out only the figures that bear in the question and I leave the rest alone. So for each one, I will say what it does inside the business, and then I put a size and the consequence in money, in people, or in time. And where the two figures move together, I will show how one will affect the other. And that last one is where most of the marks are. And it's a thing that most answers actually never do. So on to evaluate in the command words here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the question first, and then we're going to look at the verb. And the question is called the workforce data. As you can see, it's in the analysis section of professional skills with an evaluate verb. So if we open it, and before we look at the question, I'm just going to tutor a little bit and say what evaluate means. So when we have evaluate, we are going to evaluate both sides, which means we're going to weigh them. And then we're going to say which one wins and why. So if we look at the command words being evaluate, this is what I would do with it. I have to give the board both sides, which means not just the bad news. I then have to weigh them against each other. And then I will land on a position and say why that one outweighs the other. If I finish with there are strengths and there are risks, then that becomes a list and it's not an evaluation. And a judgment that doesn't say why isn't a judgment either. Okay, so the verb will always decide where the answer finishes, whilst the skill will decide what every sentence will do on the way. So the bit that most students don't separate is evaluate is the verb, whilst analysis is a skill. So you're actually doing two different jobs. The verb decides where the whole answer has to finish, and the skill decides what every single sentence has to do. You can argue a beautiful position out of points that were never developed, and then you will lose the technical marks, and you can develop every point perfectly and never land anywhere and lose the skill and mark. So most people only ever notice one of the two. All right, so what is the task actually asking for here? So evaluate what the workforce data reveals about the condition of DKK's capability base and the consequences of the business, 14 technical marks, 14 professional skills being assessed being analysis. So if you read that requirement once and then read it again and count what it's actually asking for, the condition of the capability base and the consequences for the business. So again, that's two things, it's not one. If I only do the first, I've written half an answer. So I'm a business advisor writing to the DKK board. It doesn't name a document, so I'll write pros under those headings, and notice what it doesn't ask for, which is recommendations. So solutions that nobody asked for is just going to burn your time and burn words that aren't actually going to be marked. Okay, so onto the exhibit. I'm not going to read it all out to you, you're free to have a go at yourself. But the key evidence from this exhibit is saying that funded posts 424 in posts 390. The lever rate was 14%, and it moved to 19. The time to fill was 8 to 14 weeks, and the CPD, continuous professional development, completed was 99% to 91%, and the worst region was 27%, holding 11 of 34 vacancies. So if we look at the data here from DKK, I've picked out what is the headlines and what becomes most important. So in the exhibit, there are a number of lines here, but I'm only actually going to use 4 of them. So the funded posts against posts actually filled, we got the 424 funded, 390 held. The lever rate, so 14% up to 19, and right beside it, give it time to fill, so 8 weeks to 14. So those two belong together, and I'll come back and explain why. So CPD, completion was 99%, down to 91, the smallest number on the page, biggest consequence, and the regional note at the bottom. So one region at 27%, holding 11 of the 34 vacancies. So what am I leaving alone is a staff satisfaction. It moved 1 point, so it can't really, in my opinion, carry an argument. So next, what I'm going to do is from these figures here, I'm going to do a little bit of maths. So I'm going to take the 75, and then I'm going to divide that by 400 plus 390. Then I'm going to divide that by 2, which will give me the 19%. Then what I'm going to take is going to be the 485. Which is the staff total costs, times that by 19.1 mil, and that's going to give me 92.64 mil. And then I'm going to take the 45.9, which is here, which is revenue for the year, and then I'm going to times that by 19.1 mil, which is going to give me 8.76 or 77 mil, giving me a difference of 0.5 million. So those are the figures which we're going to use. So before I build anything, we need to understand these numbers. The exhibit says that the leaver rate is 19% on an average headcount basis, 75 leavers over an average of 395, so that's 19%, which then reconciles. 10 seconds, and now I trust the number, then I'm going to argue because most people actually never check it. So second one is staff costs are 48.5% of revenue, and revenue is 19.1 million. So that's 9.26 million. So at least, or last year's 45.9, the same revenue would have carried 8.77. So about $500,000 of extra staff costs, which is the figure, isn't in the exhibit, and it's one that you're expected to actually calculate yourself. So that there is a kind of number that will actually earn you within this. So now we've looked at the exhibit, we're going to see how we can use the pre-seen for confluence within our answers. So what we have here, and the headline is it's a premium model. There's 50 salons. Every hairdresser is fully qualified with CPD every year. The top rating rests on the most skilled staff. Clients book a named hairdresser with an industry-wide labour shortage. Okay, so that's going to be what we're going to use to back up our answer. So then I need the case background, and I'm not going to use all of it. It's only the parts that are relevant. So again, every hairdresser has to hold a full CPD qualification, and then they have to do their CPD every year, which is above the industry norm. Every salon will carry the top rating, and that rating rests on having the most skilled staff, which justifies the price. Clients book a named hairdresser, not a salon, so remember that. It does a lot of work at the end, and there's an industry-wide labour shortage. More than half of the business have unfilled vacancies. That last one matters more for reasonable people. It means the longer recruitment time isn't necessarily DKK's own fault, so I'm not going to write that their leavers caused their hiring problem. So the case doesn't say that, and inventing it is worse than actually leaving that one out. All right, so a little bit about technique on a question like this. I'm going to show you VPADJ, which is the techniques which I teach my students. So we have the verb, is going to determine how your answer will finish. Then you have the point, which is what you're going to state. And then what we have to do is we have to apply that point through application, which would be a named figure from the case. Then we have development, which is going to be which means plus a size. And then judge, depending on the verb that's asked, is how much does this actually matter. So when I plan and write my answer, this is what I'm going to do. So every point that I'm going to write will use these moves. VPADJ. So again, V is the verb, and I've already done that once. It's evaluate, so I know where I have to finish my answer. Then for each point, I'm going to state the point. I'm going to apply a figure from the case, then I'll develop it, and then I'll judge how it matters. So P and A together, you'll get 1 mark. The D is the one that gets you the second, and the D is the one that most people will skip here in their SBL exam. And obviously the judge is the most important. So for example, just to run this through in this question, point is the academy can't keep up with losses. Then the application is 21 qualified, 16 stayed against 75 leavers. So that's essentially going to be the figures. That backs up our point. Then the develop, which means we have 1 leaver in 5 is replaced, which obviously isn't good enough. And then the J is so it cannot close a 34 post gap. Okay, so that's 1 point, 4 moves, about 30 words or so. So I wouldn't write it in VPADJ in the exam. What I would actually write would be something like of 21 academy qualifiers, 16 of them stayed, offsetting 1 leaver in 5 at that retention rate. The academy replaces losses rather than adding to the base. Sorry about caps. And cannot close a 34 post gap. Okay, so it's the same for moves, not a single letter in there, which I wouldn't expect to see in the exam. The letters are there to demonstrate the technique and for you to understand how to develop your answer, but a report to the board would never include them. So when I'm writing at speed, I will say them as how they are, as 4 new words. So therefore we have our figure, our mechanism, our effect, and then our weight. So that's how I would approach this question. But before I start writing, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a plan which is useful because we need to make sure that we actually fill out our argument, our analysis, our evaluation, and make sure it's balanced and come to our conclusion, and not just keep writing about the same point because our marks are going to get capped here. So in terms of my plan, I'm going to have the work force is shrinking against rising establishment, which is essentially going to be my first point. Then the shortfall is being brought back out of margin. Then the qualification bar is where cost becomes exposure. And what does that? Does not explain change. And then I'm going to put my position. Okay. So those are going to be the points which I'm going to develop. Okay, so that's going to be maybe a minute and a half of planning time. That's all. 5 headings, and 4 of those 5 headings are the answer. Notice they aren't things like staffing, cost, compliance. Each one is going to tell the board what I'm saying about the evidence before they read any word of it, so they're going to understand my point. Then section 4 is a whole heading about what doesn't explain a change, and I'll show you why that earns. So section 5 is a position because the verb is evaluate, and I have to land somewhere. So what I'll do, I'll start the clock and I'll start writing one section at a time. All right. So that puts in about 15 minutes. I'll probably give myself about 25 minutes in here to take into effect that I've been discussing. What I'm going to do, I'm writing my plan here. So the first one is we have the workforce is shrinking against a rising establishment. So the figures here is 6 extra weeks times 75 departures equals 450 hairdresser weeks. So then we have 450 divided by 52 weeks in the year equals 9 hairdressers. Okay, so what we're doing here is funded posts against filled posts as a percentage because a percentage travels and a headcount doesn't. So when the two numbers that belong together, the lever rate went up and the time to fill went up as well. So most answers will quote both and stop there, so that'll be 1 mark. So watch what makes it 2. I will multiply them. So 6 extra weeks, 75 times is 450 hairdressing weeks. So divide that by 52, and that's nearly 9 hairdressers missing for a whole year. Then the academy, and I have to be careful. I can show the retention isn't enough. but I can't show a trend because there's no prior year retention figure here. So what my response to that would look like would be the board funded 424 posts and held 390, so 8% of capacity sat empty against 4.8% a year earlier. Voluntary leavers rose from 56 to 75, so I'm using the figures where I can, lifting the leaver rate from 14% to 19%, while the leavers average time to fill lengthened from 8 weeks to 14. Okay, once I feel I've got a mark, I'll put a space. Those two movements compound. 6 additional weeks on each of 75 departures is roughly 450 hairdresser weeks, close to 9 hairdressers absent in a year. Okay, so there's a point of 21 academy qualifiers, 16 stayed, offsetting 1 leaver in 5. So now we're going to say that, which means at that retention rate, the academy replaces losses rather than adding to the base and cannot close the 34 post gap. Okay, so that's my first point. 2 things in there worth pointing at. So those 2 movements compound is the whole game. So when 2 figures move the same way, the analysis of the product, it's not the pair. So and at the retention rate is 4 words that stop me from claiming something that the exhibit doesn't give me. Okay, so now I've got my second point. Right, so the agency and overtime is 0.35 mil, and it's gone to 0.73. Staff costs are 45.9% to 48.5% of revenue. So second section, a shortage has to show up somewhere. It shows up as costs or it shows up as lost revenue. So which one is it? So my point here is going to be agency and overtime cover more than doubled from 0.35 mil, which is our application, to 0.73 mil. Staff costs reached 48.5% of revenue against 45.9% on revenue, only up 1.6%. to 19.1 million, some 0.5 million more than the old ratio would have produced, which is roughly 3/4 of that overspend is agency and overtime alone, which means that the shortage is currently being absorbed as cost rather than surfacing as lost bookings. So there it is. It's showing up as cost, not as lost bookings. That's the more comfortable of the two. So naming which mechanism is running beats saying something got worse every time. Excuse me. So next we have another point. The qualification bar is where costs become exposure. So I'm telling the examiner what I actually mean. So here we had CPD at 99%, went down to 91%. Okay, and then 9% of 390 equals 35 hair dresses with unfilled vacancies at 34. So what we're going to say here is the strongest point in the answer. It comes from the smallest number on the page. So 9% of 390 is about 35 hairdressers who no longer meet the standard. And there are 34 posts that nobody is filling. So how I'm going to structure the answer is CPD completion fell from 99% to 91%, which is our point in application. So around 35 hairdressers no longer meet the standard that every salon must hold to carry its excellent rating alongside alongside the 34 unfilled vacancies that give DKK 2 routes to the same rating review, which are salons that it cannot staff and salons that staff do not meet the standard. That rating then underwrites the premium pricing across all 50 salons. One region runs a 27% lever rate. Against the 19% average and holds 11 of the 34 vacancies, which is a third of the shortage in a fifth of the estate. problem is concentrated, not uniform. So in a state-wide response arrives too slowly. Okay, so notice what I did not right in that last bit. I did not say the lever rate causes vacancies because the exhibit doesn't tell me that, and I'm not going to invent it. All right, so point 4. What does not explain the change? Okay, so here we had the 35 to 34 from before. So this is a trap actually in what I just wrote, and I wanted to explain it. So 35 and 34 being nearly the same is a coincidence. It's not the mechanism. The mechanism is a rating requirement, and it gets triggered 2 different ways. A salon you can't staff, and a salon whose staff don't qualify. So if you go looking for numbers that match, you write nonsense. So go looking for the rule that both numbers are actually going to run into. Okay. So now what we're going to talk about is no retail commission. Okay, so it's a constant, it can't explain a change. So the 4th section, and this is one that usually people get wrong. Hairdressers get no commission on retail if the most memorable fact wasn't the case. And on this task, as a cause, it's not really going to earn much. So a weakness that was there last year can't explain why this year is different. So what would explain the change then? So the absence of retail commission is a real weakness, but it applied equally in 20x5 and 20x4 and cannot explain a 5-point move in 1 year. It caps what a pay response can achieve, but it is not the cause, and treating it as one misdirects the remedy. All right, so I said what it is instead, rather than just deleting it. It caps what a pay response can achieve, and that's the difference between discipline and dodging. So it's 40, 45 words or so, well spent. So then what we have is a position. Okay, so what we did have in terms of the vacancy was 14 weeks. The compliance was 1 CPD cycle, and the position from the client is possibly never. So the last section and the verb is evaluate in this requirement. So this has to weigh and it has to land. So both sides is a ranking and a reason for the ranking. Then the fact I told you to remember, client books a named hairdresser, not a salon. So when a hairdresser leaves for a competitor, the relationship is going to leave with them. So a departure isn't a vacancy. It's usually a transfer of revenue. And the last move is the one that will turn this list or turn a list into a consequence. So what I'm going to do to finish my answer is going to be the capability base has deteriorized on both costs and quality, and the balance weighs firmly against TKK, though destinations are known for only 2/3 of levers. Okay. The decisive factor is the 35 hairdressers outside the CPD rather than the 0.5 mil, because a year's overspend is recoverable and withdrawn rating is not. Okay, so behind it sits a loss agency cannot recover or cannot touch. Okay, so client book a named hairdresser, not a salon, when 38% of leavers join Freeland competitor or open their own. The booking and the retail recommendation goes with it. Moving client relationships to firms already replicating the offering. Okay, capacity, clients and competitors go with the same people and each recovers on a different clock, which is 14 weeks for a vacancy and a CPD cycle for compliance, possibly never for client. Okay, so the board cannot take these in the sequence. It must move on all three at once, starting in the region of 27%. Okay, so what I'm saying there is 3 losses, 3 different recovery clocks, which means the board can't take them one at a time, and that's something that no single one of these 3 losses would have told them. So that's 8 words in there on what the data doesn't tell me as well. So skepticism isn't the marked skill, but noticing costs nothing and will actually help with our professional skills then. All right, so I've done that in about 37 minutes with explanation there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause the video, check my spellings, and then submit. All right, so submitted. It's about 500 words. So that's my answer. Every figure taken through to a consequence, weighed because the command word is evaluate and a position that the board can act on. So let's have a look. Let's see what score I got for this task, and then have a look at what feedback was given. All right, 18 out of 18. So 4 marks on both. And yeah, what I want to be careful about what this means is it's indicative technique. It's not an exam result, of course, and the feedback was programmed by me. It's AI generated, so it can get things wrong. But what it does tell me is that every point was developed fair enough to earn the second mark, to drive it from 0 to 1 to 2 marks. So the feedback says that I move from a fact to a mechanism to effect, and the reader never has to supply a link themselves. So that's the 4 words that I gave you at the start, coming back at me from the marking. So let's have a look at it in more detail. It's the most useful thing on the page. It's full marks, but it's not the same as completely finished. Even at full marks, the coaching pushes 3 points further. It says my 9 hairdresser figure is well built, but I never said what the absence does to booking capacity across 50 salons. It says I move on to the region before the board has absorbed what losing the rating would actually do to the price. And it says my 38% figure rests on destinations, known for only 2/3 of leavers, and I set the uncertainty aside instead of weighing it. That means that a point that earns can still stop one move too early. So all 3 are the same note. A point that earned its own 2 marks can still stop one move early. So full marks is the ceiling of the tariff, but it isn't the ceiling of the technique. And that is the difference between an answer that passes and an answer that you'd actually want to deliver. Okay, so the takeaway is a 2-fact test. Find every sentence with 2 facts. Ask what you said and connects them. So don't invent one that isn't there. Take it from the pre-seen for confidence for what's in the exhibit. So if you are trying to get the analysis marks, don't think of analysis as use the numbers. Go through your last answer and try and find every sentence with 2 facts in it and ask what you said actually connects them to give them confidence which supports them. So if you said nothing, that would be a missing mark. It would be there more often than you'd like. And the second half of that rule matters more than much, or more so, because where the case doesn't give you a connection, don't try to invent one. So leaving the gap will cost you a mark, but marking one up will cost you that additional mark. Okay, so that was Exhibit A. That was a task on the DKK analysis I did for June 26. That was an analysis skill with the evaluate verb. So what it is every professional skill, every command word on real case material, which is the exercise. So yeah, write the answer, get the feedback, find where the mark stopped, and then fix that technique in your next attempt. So that's more useful than essentially being told what a good SBL answer looks like. So the task is linked below, and your first mark answer is absolutely free. All right, so tell me in the comments which part of that you are struggling with, and I'll try my best. So thanks for watching the video, and whatever exam that you're doing, I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully see you on the next video.